What was your major at University of Arkansas?
So at the University of Arkansas, I actually was studying economics and finance. I went to school, I initially thought I'd be a lawyer. That was kind of what I was thinking about, but I was always interested in writing and got interested in film as well. But when I was there, despite taking a bunch of writing classes and kind of having a writing mentor there, I was really on the business side and just sort of pushed that, I think, about as far as I could, which was to graduate, and then I had to decide to pivot and do something else.
What type of law did you want to go into?
I don't know that I really knew. I'd done debate in high school. I liked the idea of figuring things out and, arguing and that kind of thing. And it just seemed like, oh, that would be a fun but stable career.
What was your vision for your life while you were there at University of Arkansas? Did you have sort of a grand picture of what you wanted to do?
I mean, I guess when I decided to go to film school, at that point it would be like, okay, the grand vision is be a director, be a writer-director, and just go for that. I think before that, I always felt like I was still making films, I was still writing, and I thought, I'll have a job, I'll have a career, and I'll try and see what can I do on the side, And at a certain point, I just got to the point where I had to accept that I wasn't going to give 100% to anything else, And so I just had to go for this thing that was occupying all my time anyway, which was movies and trying to make movies and writing movies. And I figured, okay, at least if I give 100% to this, maybe it'll work out.
What changed at Arkansas that brought you to Los Angeles instead?
So, I mean, a big part of it was I was making more movies. I was gaining, confidence in my ability as a writer, not necessarily only in screenwriting, but also in prose, and starting to feel like it was something I wanted to be doing all the time and that I was getting a handle on it. I would say really the big thing it was really two things. Was one, I was seeing how much more effort my friends in the business school were putting in, and they were doing internships and they were even making money and things like that at their jobs, and I had no interest in putting any more time into it. So I was already starting to see, okay, I'm falling behind here in this category I'm supposed to be trying to excel in, right? And then I also just, I had my girlfriend at the time, who we ended up being in LA too for a long time, still a good friend. She was going to go to University of Austin, or University of Texas at Austin, for acting school, for an MFA. And when she first talked about that, I just thought that she was crazy, to pursue this. It was so unstable and so unlikely, no matter how good you are, the odds are really stacked against you. And even just that little kind of glimmer of, wow, someone really is going to do that? That seems both brave and crazy at the same time. I think planted the seed for me, well, I guess people do this. And more films I watched here and there, I would start to see from a director that they maybe had a short film, maybe they went to NYU or USC or somewhere like that. One reason too I didn't want to pursue film or writing or anything like that was I just had this sense, and I think most people have a sense like this, of writers or directors, they come from New York or LA, and they sort of have to be there and start there. And I was coming from Arkansas, it felt very far away, and very much like no matter when I started, I would be behind, the people that maybe grew up in the industry or what have you. But I did start to see, when I'd look up directors, like an indie film, look it up, someone's first feature, and you'd see maybe on IMDb that they went to USC or they went to NYU or a school like that, and I started thinking, okay, maybe there is something to this. Maybe there is like a path that is easier from there, or a way to get some footing at a school like that. And that was kind of where that idea of maybe I should go to grad school, which had never been a plan. It had always been just learn on my own, do it on my own, but thinking that could be a way to try and get myself more inside of the industry, or at least like inside a community of people that I didn't have in Arkansas.
What did your professor in Arkansas teach you about writing?
I had a writing mentor who I had my third semester in Arkansas, Molly Giles, who was a fiction writer, prose writer. And she was, amazingly intelligent person, sharp-witted person, Pulitzer Prize nominee. And really, after her class, even after I left the English program, she would read some of my writing, give notes, things like that, all like short stories, that kind of thing. And I think really what the big thing, one was just gaining confidence of just the fact that she was willing to do that, you know, and continue that, and to say to me, you know, like, you do have something, like you should consider pursuing this, without being pushy about it, because you know, she knows how hard that life is. And I think one thing that I really learned, and I might not even have learned it until really in retrospect, but I remember the moment, is just sort of her analysis of things that I wrote, like her perspective on it, because even when they were fiction, I'm pulling all kinds of things from my life, you know? And so she would have her analysis that came through in the writing, like things that came through in the writing that weren't the focus of what I was trying to write about, but very much were there thematically. And what I took away from that was the sense, and what I try to apply to my writing now, is that I'm not trying to like think of a theme, like a singular theme or something that I want to put out there and have it be about. I want to try and stay open, explore the writing, explore where it takes me, and then try and take a step back and see, well, what is the work doing, or what am I doing, you know, or my co-writer doing behind the scenes, that then could be kind of excavated, you know, and brought to light a little bit more in terms of the themes and the meaning and all of that. So finding that balance, I guess, between just being kind of stream of consciousness and not limiting yourself or editing yourself, and then later trying to get a sense of, okay, but what is really happening here?
And you've brought up a couple times the notion of having a hard life being an artist, which is absolutely true. I'm not sure law is easier in other respects. There's a lot of pressure, a lot of hours. Sometimes you don't see your family. But there's a prestige, and it's kind of like this safe route. Did anybody talk you out of wanting to leave law school?
Not really, you know. Honestly, people were pretty accepting of, you know, like my parents and everyone. I know it was something that they would have thought and did think was like risky and hard, but they were supportive, you know, kind of more immediately supportive than I thought. I thought it would be more of not an argument necessarily, but more back and forth and discussion. But I kind of laid it out the way I talked about here, which was I just knew this was the only thing I was ever going to give my all to. And so, you know, with law school, I never even got to the point. I didn't even take the LSAT. It was kind of like the last 2 years really leading up, I was saying, okay, I don't think I'm going to do this. And so there weren't really that many other options. I did apply for jobs, you know, business-oriented jobs and things like that, using my finance degree, economics degree. And I always went in not really hoping I wouldn't get it or get called back again. And luckily nothing tried to pull me away.
What made you fall in love with storytelling?
You know, I think with storytelling, there were things that I just really loved as a kid. Like I loved Jurassic Park and like the Aliens franchise. I was able to watch that younger than I should have. And just, I loved all these worlds, and I loved these characters and all these things that happened. And right away, I wanted to make my own versions of it, you know, and come up with my own versions of it. And it was honestly a way of entertaining myself. When I was younger, I would just kind of pace around and think up stories and think up variations of things that, you know, could happen to these characters from these movies I loved. And then from there, pretty quickly, it was a feeling of like, well, I could make my own thing. You know, I could write my own thing. And I wrote a novel when I was in elementary school. It was a 250-page novel, typed novel. And just every day I just worked on it, and I just thought it was so fun to do that.
I saw your movie Finding Gracie, is that it? Or
Losing
Gracie,
yeah,
okay. Yeah. I watched it on your Vimeo. I thought it was excellent. That was at Holly Shorts?
Yeah. I mean, Losing Gracie is kind of, I would consider it almost like my first like professionally made, you know, dramatic film. And that was a really cool experience, you know, really quickly out of school, working with Michael Bofschever, who's the lead actor and an actor who's always come up in a few other of my works, and just a great character actor. And yeah, that was a really cool experience because it was about trying to take something that on paper was very simple in terms of how it could be shot. You know, if you wanted to, you could have two people sit down at a table and just have all the lines play out, you know? And that exercise of trying to figure out how to make it cinematic, you know, and find the mood and find the drama and the tension and the movement and all of that was a really cool thing that we took on together. Steve Armour, the writer, Michael, and me. Yeah.
And he was from USC as well?
Yeah, so Steve was from USC, the writer, and Michael had taught a few times something like acting for the screenwriter, something like that, like a class, or writing for the actor, something like that, which was, he was an actor teaching screenwriters how to, you know, better their craft from the perspective of what an actor needs or an actor wants to look for in a role. So then the three of us just kind of linked up and decided we're gonna make a short.
Yes, it's super powerful, and it's just two characters and sort of numerous locations within one little area. But yeah, it was extremely compelling. So,
and I guess it shows. I mean, moving ahead or moving forward in this business, it's always one little thing leads to one little thing leads to one little thing. You know, and that short, which we all thought was very strong and very good. You know, it had the life it had in festivals and things like that, but there's only so far you really go with it. But it kept, it kind of impressed wherever it was. And so then from there, a casting director that I knew a very little bit through my girlfriend that I mentioned from Arkansas, she had seen the short, Liz Barnes, and she was also from Arkansas. And she said she'd really liked the short, and you know, said if you ever want me to cast something for you, I would cast something for you for free, you know. And then I'd sent her a script, and a couple years later, I ended up making a different short called Shelter, that was with Clea Duvall, and you know, Liz got me her, and you know, Clea was kind of the first, you know, someone who had been very famous, you know, in the '90s in a lot of these big movies, and kind of the first time I worked with somebody like that. And there's just sort of these steps, kind of, you keep moving forward, and it was off of Shelter that I got really my first feature. And so you just sort of have to keep putting in the work, I feel like, and trying to elevate yourself and your craft however you can, and just do your best to have people see it and share it, and hopefully someone says, okay, why don't we take it to the next level next time? Obviously, it always starts with the writing and actors and going from there.
Do you know how many screenplays are submitted each year to Nicholl Fellowship?
I know the year that I won, it was over 8,000. Yeah.
Wow, okay.
And I think that now they only allow you to submit one. Before you could submit multiple scripts, you could submit a few, and now you have to pick one. So I think that will be, for the foreseeable future, the biggest, you know, the most submissions that they ever had. It would creep up a little every year, but that was an 8,000 something, 8,300, something like that.
And what happened the first time you submitted?
First time I submitted, I just was rejected, you know. And then maybe somewhere down the line, I made quarterfinalist and semifinalist with a script, that kind of thing, yeah.
How many times have you submitted a screenplay to the Nicholl Fellowship?
I'm sure 10 times, you know, or more. And I'd submitted a few. And yeah, it was something a friend of mine told me really early at USC that I should try and go for. So I started then when I had one script, and I'd submit different ones over the years, and made semifinalists a few times with different scripts. And the script that won, which was the feature version of the Shelter short film, it made top 50 one year. And so I felt like it was really close, and I actually did all this rewriting and all this other stuff on it in between, and then submitted again, you know, randomly one year. I didn't submit every year, but submitted one year, and it didn't get really anywhere. And then during COVID, I just rewrote everything. I had time, and so I went back and I looked at that script, and sometimes scripts get kind of, they get mangled in the process of trying to get made. I'd been trying to get that film produced and working with a producer, and it wasn't any fault of hers, but just based on resources, based on people we needed to appease, or ways that it had to go. The script just sort of lost. It got into this in-between state where it wasn't something that I felt confident in anymore. And so during COVID, I went back and rewrote, looked at the old draft before I'd made all these changes and adjustments. And when I read the old draft and the old ending, I thought, okay, I was so wrong to ever change it. And that had been like a realization of like, okay, I had something good and I went away from that trying to make it better. And so I kind of put it back together and did some rewriting and submitted it, and felt like, if it could just kind of get the same kind of reader as got the first time that it made the top 50, then maybe it could go the rest of the way.
Well, that was one of the questions that we actually kind of glossed over, and I'm wondering if it applies to this, creating a commercial story versus a meaningful story. I don't know if that applies to this, but you said yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was an aspect of that. It was the appeasement of kind of people in the system, kind of in the shelter system, and we needed to work with them. And I talked to so many great people working in the system, but part of the film is about a few that aren't, and so that was always challenging to find that balance, to kind of say, well, these characters over here we can see how morally upstanding they are, and it's just these others over here that are a bit more cynical, right? But yeah, in terms of commercial potential too, that was something with that script that did change in the end. It was, honestly, actually, I think it was kind of the opposite. I think because it was an indie movie, we actually pushed it a little bit more into a bittersweet. It's always a pretty bittersweet movie, but we pushed it even more that way. But it just wasn't as earned, It didn't feel as earned as the ending we had, which actually was a little bit more uplifting. And I guess that's really the question in terms of going for commercial versus, I forget how you put it, but artistic integrity or just whatever you want to call it, is I think it just always has to feel earned. It has to feel like it's not just tacked on at the end to try and get you that last mile to the happy ending when maybe there shouldn't be one.
What was your reaction to the result of the semifinalist and then beyond?
Honestly, once it was semifinalist, I was feeling, really good, and I thought, okay, but then at that point, you don't expect to go further, really. You kind of think, this is probably as far as I'm going to go, because it drops from, I think, 150 to 10, so it's a pretty steep cutoff, and you've already kind of gone so far, and everyone you're competing against has a really great script at that point. So in a way, it's great to make semifinals, but you also think, okay, there's probably not another positive email coming. Like, this is probably the end of the realistic hope or goal with it. It's to kind of get that mile marker that you made it that far.
Are there certain genres that do better than others with the Nicholl?
Definitely. I mean, the Nicholl, when you think of it, it's from the Academy, right? And so those are the kinds of movies, like the kinds of movies that would win the best picture Oscar are like the types, like they definitely like things, things that are prestige, like prestige dramas, or deal with a real person, a biography, or feels inspired by real life. There are all different kinds of genres, but they tend to highlight those the most. And I think other festivals or competitions don't. I mean, the Shelter script never did well anywhere else, whereas other scripts of mine would do better outside of the Nicholl. So I think it's everyone's taste.
How much scrutiny would you put your screenplays through before you submitted them to the Nicholl?
I mean, generally I put them through really intense scrutiny. And so it would kind of depend probably on how much work I had to do leading up to it, but with all of these scripts, I I would write them, I would go back, really think about the structure, really try and figure out a way to make the structure feel good after I've kind of had the experience of writing from instinct or whatever you want to call it, kind of following the character journey. But I'd have a lot of trusted friends read, give notes, and just see like how are we hitting everywhere we need to be hitting is what I'm hoping coming through. Yeah.
Did you ever hire a script consultant, or these were always people maybe at USC that you went to school with or something?
Yeah, it was always just people I knew and had come to trust over the years. My friend Steve, who wrote Losing Gracie, we trade scripts back and forth a lot. He's a great writer. I was in a writing group over COVID, which was great, on Zoom, which it's called Sandbox, and that was a great thing. Every other week, I think it's 25 pages, something you're submitting maximum. So then you can kind of get a sense from people what's working, what's not. And that would be generally how I would approach it is what I'm trying to get through coming through. Like, am I succeeding at the goal? And people maybe won't always like something you're trying to do or think it should be a different way, and that's also a good thing to listen or take a note on. But for me, it's generally, are you having the reaction I want you to have? Or is something getting lost in translation?
Can you take us through the days of finding out that Shelter Animal was named semi-finalist and then later finalist with Nicholl Fellowship?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the finalist was the big one, And so after I found out I was semi-finalist, I was hoping, waiting, is there going to be something else? At that point, that there's probably some sort of process, or they were going to want to talk to you or something like that. And so I got an email maybe a couple weeks after the semifinals announcement, that said, we have some questions, or we have some things we want to just find out a little more about you, that kind of thing. And I didn't know how many people were getting this, but I knew that I had gotten nothing like this before, even making top 50. So I figured, okay, so I'm somewhere between 50 and 10, right, for the award. And so, you're writing like a little bio and maybe goals and some things like that, a resume. It was relatively simple stuff. And then I had to get on a Zoom, with a committee. And I was thinking, okay, so at this point, they'll probably ask me more questions, and they'll probably figure out, is this someone we would want to make a finalist or not? That kind of thing. And then when I got on, they basically said, you're a finalist. So that was awesome, and I was really surprised. And I knew that being a finalist, there's 5 winners, and then there's 5 other finalists. So at that point, it really felt like, okay, this is something at least I can hopefully use to try. And I didn't have representation at the time. I'd been dropped by my agent years before, and I'd left my manager just because we just had different opinions about things. Just different directions. And so I had struggled to find another manager, which I didn't expect. And I was thinking, at least if I'm finalist, someone will hopefully be interested. Yeah.
And that was my next question, was there sort of this talk of, okay, now that you've won, you need to do A, B, and C, and this will really take you even further? And was that true? Did those things work?
Yeah, I mean, after winning, we got a lot of that. I mean, we had like a week of, because it was COVID, it had to all be via Zoom, but talking with past winners, kind of coaching on the best way to try and put yourself forward, just a lot of advice. And in the finalist stage, there was like an announcement, and then there were still agents and managers starting to, at that point, come in. And all of these things are always really about what you do with them. I mean, that's really kind of the thing that I think a lot of people don't know is it's a great platform, but you still sort of need to take those steps. But I was really lucky in the fact that I had a manager reach out to me, and I spoke with him, and I was getting a couple others, and I was waiting to see which way I was going to go. But Joel, who's my manager now, he had his own agency. He has a few really big, great clients, And after being in a bigger agency and kind of like being with like a big agent and seeing the sort of like the result of that, and that didn't work, and then also being with kind of a newer agent or a newer manager at a bigger company, Joel felt like, okay, I haven't gone this way, and I think this is the way I want to go, because I really want someone who's like a partner for me, and that was what Joel is, and so I'm fortunate, I think, that I'd had the experience of trying different things as a writer, director especially, and feeling like they didn't work, and then getting the opportunity to have someone who fit the mold of what I thought would work best for me come forward and be interested in representing me.
Sure, and that kind of maybe dispels the notion of just because you get like a big agent doesn't necessarily mean that they'll have time for you.
Yeah.
And that can be disappointing.
Exactly. And I think hard to depends on the kind of filmmaker you want to be, of the kind of writer you are, especially. If you're someone who wants to pitch for the biggest projects, you probably need a big agent who's going to get you in the door. Whereas if you're very much interested in trying to make your own projects, then maybe you need something different, and you need someone who understands that. And that's how Joel works is, okay, this is the project we're working on. Like, we're working on these two projects together, and we're going to try and figure out how to get these two projects made, and that's just more my speed. Like, I want to make things, I don't want to pitch, because really that's your career. I think a lot of times in the business is just pitching, and then something hits or it doesn't, and you live off that for a while. And as much as I can, I want to try and make things, all the way through.
Is it important to have meaning in your work? It's not just,
yeah.
We all need a paycheck. There's
Sure.
nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
But
yeah, I think, for me, the meaning and the interest and excitement in the work is so important, because if it's a film, you're probably going to work on it for 2 years. Even if it's not full time, if you're writing and directing it, especially, you have to be able to see it all the way through post, and it's going to hit a point where the movie is done, but it's not done. And it has to be taken the rest of the way, but you've maybe explored most of the creative, aspects of it, even beyond it being actually completely finished. Then there's marketing, and then there's all of that goes with it. And if you don't have meaning in it, then I feel like you're going to burn through that feeling of, okay, well, it's a paycheck, and I did this and I moved on, because you don't really move on for a very long time. And so that excitement of well, at least I'm putting this thing out there that I believe in is really important.
what are some do's and don'ts screenwriters should be aware of before they submit?
I think definitely for writers, I would say it's true of any writers, but especially, when you have something like a deadline for the Nicholl or something like that, I guess just to me, like big writing do's is write something that you care about, write something that makes you excited, it gets you interested, and makes you want to find the best version of it, and keep rewriting it and keep researching if research matters, whatever it is, just keep exploring. And to me, the don't is, like a big don't is, I guess you want to do think about structure and do think about how it moves, and how it progresses. But I think don't try and reverse engineer everything about your script from a place of, I have to hit these mile markers, as we go, because I think that really limits a writer in terms of where they could land, like what they could achieve or what they could create, if they kind of let the concept or the characters or whatever propel them forward and make them want to see what's going to happen and what could happen, and find kind of the extent and limits and boundaries of a story. And I think also when people kind of do that reverse engineer thing of, okay, I have to hit this low point at this moment and this midpoint at this moment, a lot of times there's a lot of spinning wheels, I feel like, of trying to get there, of like setting something up and okay, it needs to last for 10, 15 pages, and then this new thing is going to occur, this new story point is going to occur. And I kind of think we see a lot of that today, where movies feel reverse engineered and kind of overstructured, and that they're perfectly done but sort of dead because there are not any surprises or anything happening in them. And yeah, I kind of think so I guess it kind of comes down to the same thing, which is I think the best thing you can do is to give yourself permission to explore and not try and have this kind of cut and dry outline immediately going into a project before you're writing. Give yourself that space to play around and have fun in the world.
Well, you said that structure, though, is important to you. So you say you like to sort of do the screenplay first, maybe loosely, and then you kind of go in and fine-tune the structure?
Yeah, I mean, I guess coming from editing too, I think about it like editing, having like a rough draft, a rough edit of a movie is often going to have a lot of scenes that are too long, too short, out of whack, in the wrong order. And then you're looking at that and you're thinking, okay, we have to get it right. We have to make it feel right and flow right. And I think writing's very much the same process for me. It's, writing scenes, exploring characters, things like that is like the footage, the footage and the raw cut scenes. And then it's looking at it from the perspective of, okay, now how do we take all of these disparate elements of that maybe are in conflict with each other, maybe they wouldn't match continuity. A character does one thing in one scene and a different thing in another scene that wouldn't add up, but you're just sort of exploring, and then find the through line and the path and the structure there. To me, it's kind of like documentary editing almost, in that sense. Like, create the reality of the characters. You have to make it. It's not there, so you have to write it, but then you have to also make it flow and fit within a single narrative.
How much feedback about your screenplay did you get during the Nicholl process?
Honestly, not really any feedback, because at that point it was like, they're like, this, we like this, this is the thing that we really like. And I don't really remember any agents or managers really having, potential ones having any feedback or notes or anything like that. I think a lot of times they're looking for, is this the kind of project where I know where to slot it in? Like, do I see the path forward for it? And it's either they do or they don't at that point. And maybe later some of that would have come, but it was pretty much like we like what this is, and that's why it won,
How much will you rewrite one of your scripts based on notes you've gotten feedback?
It's hard to say how much I rewrite based on notes, but I would just say I probably rewrite each one, I'm sure, a dozen times in some way or another. And just, for me, structure is very important, finding the structure, especially because I tend to write without it early on. But that's a big thing, and I edit too, and so coming at it from an editor, a lot of times I'm just shuffling scenes until I'm finding like what feels right, how do things click into place. So I'll definitely go on and on and on rewriting something.
I'm sure that helps a lot, being an editor.
It gives, in writing and directing too, it gives a lot of freedom in the sense that sometimes I'll be on set and I'll kind of think, this could be the opening of the movie. This could be the opening shot of the movie, actually, even though it's scene 3 or 4 in the script. There can be a little bit of fluidity there, which can be scary, but also, liberating.
Sure, and also knowing that, stuff, without using the cliche, we can fix it in post, but maybe we can experiment in post.
Yeah.
No,
Definitely, and Hard Miles especially was a movie where we were trying to do so much. We were trying to, just really aim for making this big movie on very limited resources. And so it was always a sense of, let's just try and grab all that we can, knowing maybe some things are in conflict. We maybe can't have this version and this version together, but if we can just try and get the best stuff, then we'll find a path, through it. And yeah, it's hard on set when you're working that way, because you're not sure that putting all the bricks, you're laying all your bricks in the right order, the right place, but you just sort of just have to have trust that you're going to then rethink it later.
Can you give us an overview of your writing process?
I guess for me, the writing process always comes down to, first, it's like excitement about the potential for something, even if I don't know what the ending is or the beginning is. Just like, oh, that's an interesting, usually world, like an interesting world, or and characters within that world, and like a conflict there. And I'll usually know if it sparks something, and I think, okay, there's something there. There's a lot of opportunity there. Not just one kind of story or one scene, but opportunity all the time in the concept to have conflict or humor or whatever it is. And really then, what I like to do is just write whatever scene seems fun to me starting out. It's really hard to start out on something new. There's a long road ahead, and so just try and start with something fun. Like, what scene excites me? Like early in my writing career after school, I had a feeling I'm not a writer. That was just the feeling I had. Maybe I could co-write, but I had lost the confidence that I was a writer, And getting back, that's how I got back into it, was just, there was one scene, I didn't know what the rest of the movie would be, but I just really wanted to write this scene. And I think that's a great way to approach it. And it lets you explore the characters. For me, I want to see, how do they talk to each other, just kind of like let it happen. And you'll start to think, okay, this character's fun. I thought this character only existed in this one scene. Maybe this character should exist in the whole movie, because they bring something different that keeps it going. And just being open and exploring. And generally then I might have 50 pages, 60 pages, after a few weeks of that. They're not all usable, but there's a sense of what the story is and what's exciting there. And then it's figuring out, well, what, if I don't already know exactly where it's going to go in the end, it's figuring that out, from there. Generally, I write by myself. I've co-written a few things. In Hard Miles, I co-wrote with my producer, and we'd done that before. We'd co-written one other script. And that's something I like doing when someone else is kind of saying, this is the thing we're doing, and then I feel like we can match each other in terms of commitment to it. That's kind of, I guess, not really about writing process, but yeah.
Well, do you remember what the first scene for Hard Miles was that you started, or did you actually start from the beginning?
So that one was such a different process, because so I don't actually remember, but that was just a lot of talking about, like, what could this be? Because it could have been anything almost, if it's just about this school and the bike ride. And we just wanted to keep it close to the real story as much as possible. But sort of after that part of the process, after writing scenes and figuring that out, then I will look at outlining and trying to think, how do we make it into one cohesive story? And what are the underlying themes? What are the underlying conflicts? I saw you interviewed him, John Truby. I really love his book.
He's awesome.
And I think what I love about it is, even though he does sort of have, these are the mile markers, I don't really focus on that part. It's more the sense of, what are the underlying themes? What's the moral argument? How do you try and get the most out of your premise? So it's really asking a lot of questions, writing in notebooks. Okay, so really, what is the premise of this? Not just a log line, but what's the conflict? Why is it this character at this time doing this thing? And just trying to really zero in at that point. What are the kind of mechanics happening under the surface of the script that gives it the drama or humor and all of that, and trying to dial in on that as much as possible. And for me, it's often a lot of, especially for something like Hard Miles, because we were trying to make it, so we're trying to get a script done so we can show it to people. So it was kind of a process of just, it feels like spinning wheels, but writing that stuff out over and over again. What really is the moral argument here? What really is the you know, the promise of the premise, and how do we make sure that we're delivering on that. And if we're not, if we're missing something, like do another pass and try and weave in the thing that we feel like we're missing. And just kind of doing that over and over again, of finding layers and nuance and hopefully connections where things plant and pay off and feel like they're all working together as one singular thing, like one singular story, as opposed to like an A story and a B story, like you'd have in a TV show, which might not necessarily thematically connect because it doesn't have to, you know, on a TV show. But I think in a movie, it's trying to really make everything about the one idea as much as you can.
It sounds like your law school career, what, 2 years you said?
Well, I never went to law school. Just, it was like 2 years before I would have had to go that I started focusing on film, but yeah.
But it sounds like that linear thinking has found its way into how you work with story structure.
I think so. I mean, I think there's something of, you know, you have your argument or your case, even though for me, I don't look at film or art as being like didactic and generally don't want to do that. I still think there's something you're trying to say. And as you're working, you have a sense of, well, this thing isn't what we're trying to say. You know, this part, this scene, whatever, it just isn't part of it. It isn't part of that whole for whatever reason, and trying to drill into that. I guess the same way, if you were trying to literally argue in a courtroom or something, you know, your opposition might call out relevancy, you know, like is it relevant to what you're trying to, you know, the point you're trying to make or the emotion you're trying to get across. And so, I think it's that weird balance of being trying to be open and creative and write from the heart and not restrict yourself and be truthful, and then to put on a different hat and go back and say, okay, look at it with under magnifying glass and say what really is happening here or should be happening here, and how do we mold that into what it's supposed to be. And honestly, by the end of the process, I don't even feel like I wrote it, because it just seems like all of these different sides of me, I guess, taking a different pass on it, and hopefully then you feel good about it.
Sure, you're kind of pleading your case for the movie viewers.
Yeah.
You know, and how will we feel toward Greg Townsend, you know, his character and the other kids in it. Yeah.
And I guess the other thing on that is also realizing what a script's purpose is at each stage of the process. Because it really is different at each stage of the process. And, you know, there was a time on Hard Miles where we're going back and forth on all this stuff with the script, and we determined, well, the point of the script now is for us to send it to someone who can play Greg and who will want to play Greg based on what the script is. And so let's just focus only on that for this next pass, is making sure the script is sort of deep and rich enough that an actor will want to give us the 5 weeks or whatever we need to make it, and find the time to do that.
Yeah, and I thought your choice for Matthew Modine was excellent, especially too in the beginning when you see him on the bike. I guess he was getting up in the morning or whatever, puts the fan on. You feel there's a heaviness. You don't know exactly what burden he's carrying there, but you're intrigued. Mm-hmm. You're like, I want to know, why is this guy on this bike? But I'm feeling like it's not a light ride for him. There's like something weighing him down, and I love it. So, will you write a treatment before you write a screenplay?
So generally, no. And even in things like as far as treatments go, I generally have to write some scenes and things like that to sort of get inside of it. I have maybe written just a few scenes and then try to go back and write a treatment. But usually, the only times I've done that is if it's something required, like a requirement for like a grant or a work situation, you know, where people are going to need a treatment sooner than I could really write a whole script, and then also maybe payments are coming in stages, and so the treatment is the first stage that you could really hit, and so it's kind of a matter of like trying to get as much of my process done where I can then do a treatment the same way I'd go back and look through an old, a first draft and figure out structure. So yeah, it's a weird, to me, like a treatment always feels a little bit more like something for someone else, to have an understanding of the script, but it is a chance for exploration, and finding a path, but it's not quite as, doesn't feel quite as full or like fulfilling as actually writing.
If you were interested in storytelling, you may also like our new book, Story Questions, the sponsor of today's video. It's a story tool that offers you over 1,500 story questions that you can use as story prompts. It's packed with over 40 categories, so whether you are in the brainstorming stages, developing characters, dialogue, or rewriting, it can help you at every stage of the writing process. Think about this statement. Most powerful stories are just great answers to strong questions. We've linked up to story questions in the information section below. Now back to the interview. What's one truth that no one can teach you about screenwriting?
I think it's your own truth, like really. I think it's like the thing that no one can teach you is what is it that compels you to want to write it, to make it. I think the one truth, it's kind of maybe more about the industry exactly, but it relates to screenwriting, that I think you sort of do have to learn for yourself in terms of looking at other people's work, is how something that's like a good version of something you've seen before isn't always like enough, to get people excited. And even if it's just a little bit, you have to have your own spin on it. And I briefly did, when I was in school, I interned at a company and was reading scripts, and so I was reading scripts from people that had written great movies I'd seen, and maybe they had a spec or they were co-writing on something, and you do realize really quickly there that read like a cop drama or like crime drama or something, and get to the end and think that was a pretty good version of that, and then think, but that's not enough to propel, all the forces that need to go into action to make this movie, right? And that was kind of eye-opening for me. Was I was reading things that were really good, but that wasn't enough, to excite people. And I think that's something that's hard for people to come to terms with related to their own work, perhaps. That maybe they're doing good work, but it doesn't mean that other people want to dedicate 2 years of their life and millions of dollars to getting it made.
So good is kind of not good enough. It's got to be something where you're just like, oh wow, yeah, I didn't even see that coming.
Yeah, exactly. I forget who. There was two writers that had a thing. It was like crap plus one, like this fallacy where people would see a movie and they would say, well, that was bad. I can write a movie better than that, so therefore my movie can get made. But that's a different situation than someone who's hired to write a movie because there's an underlying concept or an executive wants it made, and it comes out about as good as they're able to make it, given the limitations. That doesn't mean that a script of that quality delivered from outside the system would be praised or put into production. And so I think then it kind of all comes back to that: why are you driven to write this script?
Right, and then there's the whole, sort of cliche, one for the studio, one for you. Mm-hmm. And there was one that I love that one of our guests said, one for the real, one for the meal. Mm. And I mean, it's reality, Yeah. People have to pay their rent. So there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, not everybody's going to be like, this is the next, Godfather right here. Some stuff may fall flat, but there might still be an audience for it.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, it's about finding your own excitement in it. It's like there's a lot of talk around, like Barbie, like the movie Barbie, right? I mean, I would say like that movie is about as good as a movie about, Barbie probably could be. Does it mean maybe it's like going to be considered a classic in 100 years? I don't know. But like they knew what they wanted to do with it, and they put a lot of thought and care into making, a movie that had artistry and and like meaning within this, package that is very just shallow, right? That would be very shallow from an outside perspective. And I think that's kind of, I think how you have to try and do it is to say, I'm going to make Barbie the Godfather, even if that makes people kind of, raise their eyebrows at you.
Sure. And then with Lady Bird is a much more, it's a smaller story, and some people might enjoy it more or felt more compelled toward the character.
Yeah.
And it's not done on this grand scale, but there was something much more personal about that story.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess that's just the way it always seems to go, right? Is it's the personal, the personal creates the quality, and shows the vision for the artist, and then it's okay. Well, then how do we kind of capitalize on that, right? Which again, which is fine, and I understand that as well as anyone right now, for sure. Yeah.
How does your subconscious factor into your writing process?
I think for me, the subconscious aspect is like writing and letting it go, like sort of creating a space where I'm just going to write to this, on this scene for 30 minutes or an hour, whatever it is today, and what happens, and not trying to be too calculated on that. I definitely think it's so hard to pin down what's happening with the subconscious, right? Because it's happening, but we're not conscious of it. But I think it's letting myself have space to just let ideas come. I think part of that's the research too, and just like planting things on hoping that your subconscious grows something that will pop up, and you go, oh, that's a good idea, and then can explore on that with your more kind of critical mind, conscious mind. But I think it's really about creating space for it as much as you can, and not trying to force something or lock something in before it's ready.
Would you say you're more structured, or you may be more, I don't even know what the alternative is, just more sort of open-ended and kind of like, hey, let me see where the day takes me kind of person? Yeah,
I think I've been more of a like, let me see how the day takes me person recently. I think I do better when I have structure. I think that if I have to get somewhere at 10:30 a.m., I'm going to get an hour and a half of writing done before that, if that's the only time I have during the day, which can be good or bad. I think it depends on your deadlines. But I think I'm going to try and build more structure in for myself as much as I can coming up.
Sure. And when you have a lot going on, I think it's easy to have certain deadlines when things aren't happening, maybe during COVID or whatever.
Right.
It's easy to, I've got the whole day, and then nothing happens.
It's true. I mean, that's why the writing groups and things like that are great, because then at a certain point, you do have to get your pages in if people are going to read them in time. So I think anyway, building in some kind of deadline is a great thing to do, so long as you don't kind of cut yourself off at the knees by forcing something that isn't ready.
How do you get unexpected things to happen during the writing process?
It's a good question. Like unexpected in terms of like story, like things that...
Or your character says something to you that, wow, and then they become this real person.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's I guess the scary thing about it is I don't know how you make it happen. Like, I think it sort of has to come from kind of, again, feeding yourself enough about the world and the characters, and having a concept that you feel excited enough about, and then giving yourself space to just let yourself write and explore, and turn off the critical part of your mind, so that you can start to feel the things come up, whether it's from your subconscious or wherever, and just not trying to put everything into like a too neat of a box too early on, and that's probably really the big thing, is just trying to be open. And sometimes I'll have an idea and I'll talk with a friend about it, and maybe they'll want to brainstorm or something else, and I'll think it's too early. Like, I don't want to take it down a path over here when the path over here is where maybe the best result would be. And I just have to kind of keep a little bit of distance from it so that I can eventually get that clarity. But I think it's just openness and not trying to force it.
Is that your sort of MO in life? Is that how you...
Maybe.
That's a good... I think that works. I mean, there's a time to be aggressive, and
Right.
then there's a time, I think, to just... we don't know what's going to happen in life,
Yeah, I think that's a balance, especially as like a writer director, because as a director, I do try and be very open with actors and things like that, and you want to have an openness with your crew, but also when it comes down to it, at a certain point, when the clock's ticking, it's just, this is what we're doing. We're going this way, and there's not time to be open to other paths and things like that. It's just, we're taking this path because it's a path, and it'll get us there. And that's the most important thing right now. And I don't think that's the most important thing when you're trying to write something that is really good or really surprising. I think you have to give yourself a little bit more exploration, but you also have to do the work, and you have to be trying to write scenes, trying to write pages, actively doing something. Otherwise you won't do anything.
How much time will you spend crafting an ending?
I think the ending is about as important as the beginning, maybe more important. And it's funny, for me, endings, for the most part, kind of feel like they just happen in a way, because so much it's kind of the tip of the spear, everything else has been building to that. But getting it right, you do have to really think about your language and, economy of the moments and how those all work. But to me, it's relatively, I guess, just craft-oriented at a certain point. And so it's sort of baked in, I guess that they sort of come together. Like the ending comes with how it's crafted. Like that's what an ending is, if that makes any sense. And so generally, the times when I'm really working on an ending, something else is wrong, or I'm going the wrong direction. I would have spent a long time trying to craft the new ending I put on the Shelter script, the one that won the Nicholl. That would have been one where I would be like crafting over and over, trying to make it read right. But I feel like if you have to spend that much time in really a visual medium trying to make it read right, something isn't clear enough in it. So I think that's it's just kind of a weird contrast maybe there. Like it should work sort of in its most basic, like kind of brute force way initially, or maybe it's not right.
What is your research process?
So generally anything, I think the research is a really fun part of the process. I just try and read books, read articles, if there's articles about the real person, just kind of Google, for instance, I'm working on a Western now, and just Googling stuff about the Oregon Trail and how did people go to the bathroom? Like literally just like, what are the details of this? Because you don't know where it's going to lead or what it might spark. And so I think that's such a great part of the process, because I think you need jumping off points to find the best story or the best character conflicts. And as much as you can sort of feed those into your, as much as you can just get those thrown at you, however you want to look at it, as much detail as you can get, research you can get, you never know what's going to spark a new idea and take you on, a different direction. And I think that's also probably why I'm averse to outlining too much early on, is I don't know all that stuff yet. And so I'm kind of feeding myself, and then maybe writing or have an idea, or it could be this, it could be that, and then trying to feed myself more and just kind of gorge on information.
And you had read an article about Greg Townsend?
Yeah. My producer, Christian, he found this article by Tracy Ross, and there were several articles on Greg, but that was the one that it was just the most personal and well-written and just fullest, like a full portrait of him, and what he was trying to do, and how he pushed the boys and all of his great intentions, and also how much he cared, and just how much he was always about going forward, forward with them. It's just keep moving forward. And it was just such an interesting portrait of someone who was helping so many people, but wasn't going to do it in this cuddly way, because that's not what they needed. They needed structure, and discipline and things like that. And so that article for us was something that just gave that window, before we met the real Greg, to sort of go, okay, there's something, at least this version of it, there's something to it, to this story. And then trying to figure out what are all the other sides, of Greg in real life and from other people's perspectives. But it just it's like a little, a beating heart that you can go back to, that feels like its own thing that's alive. Yeah.
When you knew that you were going to eventually meet Greg, did you stop doing any research? Did you say, I don't want to be biased, I don't want to know anything more, I want to just meet him?
Yeah, in a way it was sort of, and I was lucky that I had Christian as a co-writer too, because in a way it was kind of the opposite, where he met Greg first, and he was getting to know Greg, and he was in contact with Greg's wife early on. That was how we got to Greg. And so at a point I was still trying to figure out how everything fit together, because I knew there was something about Greg and his father, and the sense of him being like these boys and having a life where he did come from a similar kind of background as them, where he has a brother who's in prison for the rest of his life, and he has a father who was abusive. That was important to the story, and important to sort of the drive and the that they're all kind of driven by trauma in some way or another. Maybe for Greg, it drove him to be better and do better, and for people that didn't have that structure or couldn't make that structure for themselves, it drove them to maybe commit crimes or act out or just do whatever. And so I thought that was really important to sort of like the myth of the movie, because I feel like every story is a myth in some way. It's very much real stuff from Greg's life, but it's also its own thing, its own character that's separate from him. He's his own person, separate from the movie. And so I was like, I don't know I wouldn't have put it in this terms, but I didn't fully know how the myth of this character and his background and all those things fed into what the movie should be yet. And I was worried if I met him too early, I would turn myself off, like turn off my ability to find that. And so then when I did meet him, it was great, because I was able to take him in as a person and then think about ways throughout the script that we could finesse things here or there, so that they did feel more like him. And he was able to weigh in, and he was very understanding of the process, in the sense where he could have said, well, this didn't exactly happen like this or like this, even though everything very much is based on reality. Obviously, we have to condense things and change things around. And he really just picked very specific details about himself that he would just say, well, I just wouldn't do this, or I wouldn't do that, while still allowing us to have the dramatic arcs we needed, and to kind of give him an arc in a movie that might have been an arc that he might have had 20 years earlier in life, or across a longer period of his life. And he was okay with us doing that, so long as we just, got the little things right along the way.
Yeah, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers, because I hope people see the film. But when you say that Greg was so much about moving forward, it showed so much in the storytelling of the moving forward, but you saw so many things were pulling him down. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to give away too much, but he was constantly dealing with all these different things being pulled down, but his sort of aim was to keep going forward, hence the metaphor of, on this bike. So.
No, absolutely. I mean, and like the real Greg, I mean, he he does so much. He does an impossible amount of things. I feel like he's someone who just, I think he sleeps 3 or 4 hours a night every night and just is always doing something, creating something, helping, continuously helping with these boys. And it was like the extent and the weight of his responsibility, is so big. And that was something that we wanted to get across, was just everywhere he was going, everything he was trying to do, something was sort of falling apart and he had to fix it, whether it was the boys and their interactions or, the setting up the trip for the school. It was always just like putting out these fires everywhere he went, where he doesn't even have time almost to think about himself or his own things that he wants to deal with or his own past. But it's still there.
Sure.
Yeah.
And maybe it was by design.
Yeah.
That is one way of coping, is just to be so busy that you don't need to deal with anything.
Yeah.
And I think it was beautifully portrayed. So, what's your process for creating character?
Character, for me, it's kind of all together in the same thing of like trying to write them and see how they talk. I know everyone's different. For me, when I'm writing the characters, they talk to each other and they have their own voice, and it's something that I'm very interested in, is just how people speak. It's something I keep track of when I meet people. I'm just interested in everyone else's just dialects, I guess. And so it's sort of I often get it through talking, like through how do they talk to each other. And then there is that sense of going back and just trying to figure out what is happening underneath. I do try and go back through and be analytical in the sense of what are the want need, what is their kind of surface level goal versus the thing that would actually give them satisfaction in life or actually fulfill them, and how are those in conflict with each other, and try to think about their psychology in that sense. But because it's a medium of, it's a visual medium, it's kind of we're outside of the characters, unlike a novel. So a lot of it is about kind of crafting what do we see of them, even if we don't know what's happening inside of them. What's the action that they're taking and going through, and how might we interpret that? And so there's a little bit of distance there too, and it's kind of being a bit changing hats and going back and forth, and sometimes really thinking inside the character and then trying to internalize that, and then going outside of them and looking at what you're seeing, and being a bit, you can at that point be a little bit judgmental of them, or a little bit new, I guess, like experience what they're going through new, because now you're trying to look at it through the camera. And honestly, thinking about actors is a huge way to, I think, flesh out a character. Even just thinking of an actor you really like who could be great for it, even if maybe you would never get them. There's times when I think about years ago writing a script role I thought would be great for John Goodman, and at a certain point you look and you go, well, John Goodman's not going to say that line. That's not a good enough line for him. Like, why would he say this line? Why would he want, and then you think, well, what would he say? And then you craft towards that. And I think that's a really great way to just trick your brain into thinking about a character in a new way, where it's not just your voice, but someone else's voice coming through. And then going beyond writing, I guess, into directing, it's really try to give the actors a lot of space and cast people who are bringing a lot more, like, just it naturally seem to have like an understanding of the character and like a depth of understanding of that character that goes so far beyond what you've thought of, that they're going to always be feeding new things into it that will let them kind of grow and enrich and become three-dimensional.
I would have to imagine, maybe I'm assuming here, that you've met so many fascinating people in just growing up, because you're from Canada originally, mm-hmm. but you grew up in Arkansas, mm-hmm. and then you spent summers in Ireland.
Yeah.
So you were probably exposed to so much interesting conversation, dialect?
Yeah, I think that's a big part. I mean, I always love, the way people talk, and it goes beyond accent. It's what are the words they throw in between the kind of just the kind of expressions people use and all that. It's just always kind of interesting to me. Probably, yeah, from jumping around to different places. And then also, I think, growing up in Arkansas, and I consider myself really an Arkansan, or Southerner, I guess, but still being a little bit just enough outside of it to kind of go, well, that's weird that they do this here, And I think that definitely sparks a little bit of that, is kind of feeling a part of something while also outside of it enough to be a little bit analytical about it.
Sure, because again, I'm just assuming, but in some way you were maybe an outsider in all those parts because you never really were totally from one place.
Sure. I mean, I think that's 100% true. And, it's the kind of thing where I didn't really feel like I was from the South or in Arkansas until I moved to LA. And then you kind of realize the sort of total sum of your experiences. And even though there I would maybe be not as much of a local, despite living there, most of my life, or at least most of my life before I moved to LA. But when you then go somewhere else totally different, where people are from New York or they're from wherever, other countries maybe, you kind of go, okay, I get it. Broad strokes, I am this thing. But yeah, it's a little bit of a lot of different hats and perspectives, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's probably helped with characters, just because you've been, different meanings behind a word.
Totally. Yeah.
Bless your heart,
Yeah, exactly.
means different things in, different parts. And I think that's great that you had that experience. You said on Scott Meyer's Go Into Story, I think you were interviewed by him, that you ask a question sort of the character, what is their greatest fear? And then that's where the character will really come alive for you. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't remember saying that.
Oh.
That was such a good interview, though.
He's awesome.
He was so smart, such a smart analyzer of the script.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, I think I guess I can't remember that now, because that was one of those things I think related to trying to fully flesh out that character, especially in Shelter. Although we have like 3 different characters, female characters, who are really driven in their own way, right? And it was kind of figuring out how, like what really drives them, and they were all a little bit driven by fear, really. And I think that's pretty true to life. I think it's everyone has goals and dreams and things like that, but so much we operate out of fear or just concern about what if things go wrong, what's the worst that could happen, that kind of thing. And that script very much, and I think probably any good drama really is about somebody overcoming, like being driven by their fear in some way and then overcoming it, in another. And I guess that goes back to the want need, like, because generally what people need is to find some kind of like balance or comfort, or to let something go, but they're like too afraid to approach it, so they have some other goal or some other thing that they put in front. Kind of like you spoke about earlier of, in terms of the movie, Greg, it's like always going forward, because that's easier than the thing that's beneath the surface, that you can't say, oh, we're going to work on this for 2 hours and fix it, the way you would something mechanical or whatever.
Yeah, and it seemed as if the young people that went along with him eventually almost somehow got in that mindset too. I know there was so much resistance in the beginning, but then maybe they started to see the same thing, and it was about going forward. Yeah,
and it's, I mean, in real life too, I mean, that's really what Greg is trying to do, is to show them, everyone's looking kind of through tunnel vision, right? And to say, actually, there's this whole other world, there's all these different directions you can go. It's not just this one path or that one path. It's so much bigger than that. And it's, it's kind of Plato's cave in a way, or what Matthew would always say is like the blinders on a horse, you know, is taking the blinders off the horse is what he was trying to do. And I think that that's sort of what just happens by being on that journey, is they can't help but see the bigger picture a little bit.
I believe you said in a previous interview that in Hard Miles, you talked to Matthew Modine about his character, Greg Townsend, and maybe you both discussed the backstory about the father. And correct me if I'm wrong, please, did Matthew think maybe that the father story should have maybe been toned down or not in the film?
Yeah, that was something that we discussed early on. And, you know, from Matthew's perspective, it kind of was a sort of a thing of like, where do we want to put our focus? Which kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like what is the movie? What is the story? And to Matthew, there was a lot of talk around the brother, a lot of talk around, and then the whole scene with the father, and just, look, if we take this out, is there more time for the boys, like the boys and their relationship with Greg? You know, could that be expanded on or elaborated on? Is this where we want to put our resources, given how limited our resources were on the movie? It was also initially a scene that was very overwritten. Like, you know, when Matthew got the script, it wouldn't have been in as good of a place as I would normally like send a script to an actor who, like, if I hadn't known Matthew, I'd worked with him once before, and I think if I had known Matthew, I would have been wary of sending it quite at that point. And so it wasn't quite fully working either. It was something that we would have to figure out, and did figure out together, he and I, in terms of cutting stuff and rewriting and just paring it down, and then even more in the edit. But yeah, initially the question was, is there something better that could take up this time and space than what's here? For me, it was really important. It was really important that Greg was driven in the same way as the boys, and that we would see the potential. It's not, you know, something that happens, or I guess in a way aspects of it happen, but we wanted to see the potential of Greg comes from somewhere that pushed too hard. You know, it was too hard on him. And is that something that could happen with the boys, or like at least an understanding of he comes from somewhere that's too hard, and he has to find that balance in what he's doing with them. And I just thought that layer, without that layer, that the story would be very, I just feel like very, like too slight or too pat, you know, too easy. And yeah, so it was kind of a thing of like, we're definitely doing this. And Matthew, you know, it was never a situation where, you know, and especially to his credit, and I appreciate his trust so much, because he knew that the script wasn't right. Like, you know what I mean? We had notes on the script, and we talked through and we did writing, but instead of him saying like, hey, I've got some notes, and if we can resolve these notes, then yeah, I'd love to do it, which would have put him in a position of holding all the cards and kind of having all the power. You know, he specifically did not do that, and read the script and said like he wanted to do it. And then from there, as collaborators, you know, kind of equal collaborators, we talked through what we could and should change, which I just think is great. You know, like such a better situation, because then I could be honest about things, and he could be honest about things, and it wasn't like a situation where maybe I would have had to say, oh, okay, yeah, this is the better version, after changing it, and not really feel it, you know, because then we wouldn't arrive at the best movie together.
Yeah, and I think it made Greg's character, or Matthew Modine's character as Greg, so much more relatable, because you saw that even when he was pushing, that he wasn't really above these kids. He used to sort of be one of them,
right.
And he wasn't one of these people that work within the system that maybe they got the job just because they thought it was noble, but they
right.
hadn't really experienced that. And you know, so we saw some of the good in the system, and then some of the maybe ones that didn't totally understand the kids.
Right.
And I think that's a daily reality for social services, and
yeah,
you know,
absolutely
showed more of depth, and that he was really a caring person, even in moments when maybe he got mad.
Right, exactly. And I think too, something just in terms of process is just like how important communication is, and trying, because for me, I always knew, well, we'll never let it be the thing where it's the bad version of this scene. You know what I mean? Like, we'll cut the scene before it's the bad version, like in terms of like the actual confrontation with the father in the end. But just kind of like talking through with someone, okay, because I fully understood his concerns about the scene, the way it was initially written, you know, and just finding that thing of remembering people don't know how you see something playing out. You have to talk through it and find that, you know, make them see how you're seeing the scene so they can understand that they're in good hands as you proceed forward to trying to make it the best version it can be.
Sure, sure. And there's so much leading up to that. Again, I don't want to give away spoilers, but there's so much pulling at him. Again, you said there's just like something happening at all times, like almost like a movie, really.
Yeah.
It's falling apart at all times, and he's trying to keep it together.
Yeah.
And it was very challenging. So.
Well, the thing, I mean, I talked earlier briefly about, you know, how we're restructuring things, or as you're watching the movie, or as we were shooting the movie, I mean, didn't always know, okay, this is scene 3, but it could be scene 1, something like that. It was something early on that I thought about, which was Greg on the stationary bike, you know, he's riding, he's going so hard, but he's not going anywhere. You know, like that's what that is. And that ultimately became basically the first shot of the movie. It's the second, but the first shot proper, I would say. And yeah, that's kind of that thing of all of this momentum and spinning wheels and all of this stuff, but you're still stuck where you are. And that's what all that with the father is for me in the movie. You know, it keeps him stuck. For the movie Greg. I always want to say the movie Greg because he's a real person, you know.
Sure, sure.
Who dealt with things, it's a true part of his life, but he dealt with him in his own way, on his own terms, and on his own timeline, you know.
You have a beautiful knack for creating scenes. What is your philosophy for creating a scene?
Thank you. I mean, in terms of creating a scene, I guess there's something so exciting in a scene when you feel things change, you know, when you feel like we started at this one point. I mean, in a very analytical sense, the scene has to have a shift, you know, something has to change in the scene, right? And people have to want something. But for me, it's really much about that moment when people are either realizing what's happening, you know, and starting to come to terms with it, or they're, you know, surprised by something, whatever it is. But it's such a hard thing, because I feel like so often in scenes I am just trying to explore it all these different ways, you know, or just like see what happens and try and land, like arrive at that moment. You're almost spinning your wheels as you're writing, you know, until you get to that moment of, oh, but then this thing is going to happen. Like the point of the scene has to occur. And gosh, it's such a hard thing to. Give me 1 second to think about it.
Yeah, sure, no problem. No problem. I mean,
it's funny, my process for writing is so weird to me, or it seems like different than a lot of other people, which is I do so much exploration on my own, and almost by the time I have all my most important scenes and I'm looking at them critically, I take them for granted, you know, like for granted that they exist. And so then it's like, okay, well, this is like a C level scene because it's a first draft, and now I have to try and figure out how do I escalate it and build it up. But I think for me, the big thing, and it goes through all of writing, but especially at scene, is just trying to initially live with the characters and try and feel like, whose head are you in, whose perspective are you in, and like try and go on the journey with them in real time, where you're kind of like laying down the, you know, like the planks on the walkway of the scene as you're going, because you have to write it. But that experience of trying to go through it with someone, you know, with the main character. And I think that's the biggest thing for me in a scene is like, who am I with? Whose POV am I in? And how do I kind of weave through it in that way? And maybe later it needs to have 2 point of views or something like that, you know? Maybe that's the best version of the scene. But I think in terms of exploring it, initially, it's just what's the experience that they're having, and then try and kind of document that so that you get the feeling of the changes that are occurring in the scene. Because hopefully you have some idea starting out, something has to happen in this scene, right? And just building from there.
And did Matthew Modine get to meet Greg?
He did.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And so Greg was on our set most of his time, actually.
Okay, wonderful.
Which could have been challenging, or it could have been trouble in a way, but it wasn't, because it was just, you know, you could have, if Greg was a different type of person, he might have said, well, it wasn't like this, it was like that all the time. And that's just not who he is or who he was. And so it was great because he could give he could tell real stories. He could weigh in at times. You know, there were times when the boys' conflict would escalate, like when it's supposed to escalate, they're supposed to kind of get in each other's faces. And, you know, the actors, they're all kind of living it. I give people a lot of, it was hard to manage 5 people, 6 people in every scene. So it's giving everyone a lot of freedom to just live their character's truth, whatever you want to call it. And so there were times when things would escalate between like the Wilbright character and the Atencio character, and I would think, I should probably reel that back. Like that just went too big, it's too much. And Greg was just thinking it to myself, and Greg said at the end of the take, oh, that's just what these boys were like. That feels so real. Wow. So then I have a context. Okay, it isn't just like some dirty looks here and there. It's like they're really getting up in each other's faces, and they need to be separated and pushed away and all this stuff, and that's where it goes, you know. Right.
The chaos of sort of some of the baggage was coming to the forefront.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No, the scenes were super strong, and I never felt like I wondered whether these were boys from the program.
Right.
The dialogue felt so real to me. I didn't feel like it was just, you know, forcing someone from a casting agency to sort of fit a certain type. So I felt like they really embodied the characters. No,
thanks. That's a credit to them, and we had a lot of, you know, letting them the space to improv and stuff, because if we were going to write what every character said to every little thing, you know, the script would be 30, 40 pages longer. And so that economy of screenwriting, which you have to have, you also have to sort of give a little bit more, in a movie like this at least, a little more just agency, I guess, to your actors to find their own little comments or own little lines here or there when it makes sense. And that would add a level of authenticity too.
Sure, and I think too, some of the stuff that was unspoken was the lack of trust, which is understanding that someone that comes from that environment is going to have a lack of trust, and then Greg trying to get them back, and maybe not super win their trust, but just let's get back and let's go forward again. So I thought that was wonderful too. Yeah. So sometimes it was what wasn't said.
Yeah.
Which is just as important. Do you have any rules for writing a great scene?
I mean, I think the biggest rule is like, don't overstay your welcome, you know, really. And it's more like a rewriting thing, but just really try not to overstay your welcome, and try and think about force yourself to think about how it fits in the movie as a whole. You know, I think is the rule to kind of follow, and remember that, you know, a movie is a series of scenes and a series of moments. And so kind of, I think the rule is just force yourself to get in as late as possible and get out as early as possible, and really think about like, is this a scene we live in? Is it a landed scene, you know, or is it a scene that is trying to get us somewhere else, you know, as part of a bigger part of the story? And I don't know if it's like a rule per se, but that I think is part of the process.
And when you're writing, do you know that you're writing a great scene, or that won't even happen until you get it in front of actors?
I would say sometimes when writing, especially if it's something that's sort of action-oriented, you know, or something like that, you can kind of feel like you're getting the experience of it, you know, or if it is like a dialogue scene, you can get the experience of like, okay, I'm seeing the back and forth, I'm seeing the sort of conflict play out, and that can be fun. But there's definitely scenes where, I mean, in Hard Miles, there were several scenes where I didn't feel very confident in the scenes, like really crucial scenes. Like a scene later late in the movie where all four of the boys, you know, it's comes to a head of like, are they going to go off on their own, or are they going to go kind of follow in Greg's footsteps? And you know, it was a scene I really didn't have much confidence in on the page. You know, it felt a little bit. It was one of those things that have been rewritten many times. You know, kind of putting on the sort of like logical hat to say, okay, actually should be this character does this and this character does that. It felt a little bit mechanical to me, at least in the process of writing it. And then when we were auditioning those, you know, those four boys plus you know, the sort of the runners up for those roles, seeing them do the scene was when I went, oh, this scene might be good actually. Like, you know, because they brought not just the mechanics of it, not just this character does this or does that, and this is the culmination of their arc or whatever, you know, which feels so dry. They brought all the emotion and all of the realness to it that wasn't packaged, you know, and like worked over. It was just immediate and real. And so that's the exciting thing. And what we kind of feel like is like, okay, well, they saved us from something that shouldn't really work as well as it does, because they're bringing all of their magic to it. And that's the exciting thing, I think, about directing and seeing it and putting the script aside and just seeing, okay, what is it at its essence, and trying to zero in on that more on the day.
Is the best scene that you write always the best scene in the movie?
I think no. You know, I think there's such different things, because writing is ultimately does have to become so technical, you know, and I think like if you're open to the nuances and things that come through, if you're writing a movie, which is what, you know, we're talking about, it is going to be the unspoken things often that come through and add a layer onto something. And it's often the scenes that you really pull things away from that have that, where a scene was kind of maybe overwritten or weak, but it was giving the actor and giving everyone sort of, here's the ammunition that you need to pull this off. And then you take away all the stuff that's extra, that would make people kind of cringe or go, oh, no one would really say that or whatever. And then maybe you have something great that's unspoken and just feels real. And I think that's kind of the weird magic of it. And a lot of times we have a thing, Christian and I, because we've worked together where I edited for him too, and now we've written 2 scripts together. We just have a shorthand, it's just clever, not funny. You know, especially when we're writing comedy, it's like wordplay and all these things. Things can be clever on the page and you go, oh, that's kind of nice, that's cute. And just once people are saying it, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a waste of time, honestly. Because no one's gonna laugh, it's not surprising. You know, comedy is the surprise and truth. And so that kind of thing where you'd have something that feels clever on the page and then when you're watching it just sits there. It doesn't go anywhere. And so you have to kind of separate those two, I think, the written word. And I guess if you're a really sophisticated enough writer, then you'll just identify that right away. And maybe you can write a scene that you know, this will be the best scene in the movie, even though no one thinks so right now on the page. But I also think that would require some kind of level of clairvoyance that, you know, we don't really have.
Sure. They don't teach that in screenwriting.
Right.
I think you said previously, though, that, you know, there's so many wonderful actors out there, but when an actor can really bring just like this extra quality where it's like that's the real person, how do you know that actor's going to have that quality? Do you see that in the audition? Yeah,
I think you just see it, you know, and it's scary because there's so many great actors who can do a role, you know, and do a really good version of a role. Generally, actors are very talented and they can do a wide range of things. And what I guess I would always look for is I'm trying to find the sort of underlying conflict or whatever it is, the sort of clash of themes or ideas, you know. Like in Hard Miles, there's a lot of different of that. There's Greg's perspective, and there's how does that perspective bump up against Woolbright, who's kind of the leader of the boys, right? How does it bump up against Hattie, you know, who sort of like represents more the institution, or however you want to put it, and kind of a more just maternal look at things, maybe. But it's sort of that thing of like, how do these things hit each other, and what's that conflict supposed to feel like, you know? And for both of those actors, for Joaquin, who plays Woolbright, and Cynthia, who plays Hattie, they just have such a quality, you know, to them. And with Joaquin, even though he's a lot younger, he's like smaller than Matthew. He's pretty bulked up now, but you know, he's still a kind of a kid, right, in the movie. But with him, he just thought, this guy absolutely can just go toe to toe with him. He's not going to take no for an answer. He's not going to get walked over, and he's going to naturally rally these boys around him. And you just see that in him. Like, you just see, you're not gonna get one over on him. You know,
sure.
Like, like whatever line that you could write for Matthew to say, he's going to say something back, and he's not going to get fazed. You know,
right.
And so like Cynthia's the absolute same way, of that mix of humor and taking a step back and having kind of a critical eye, but not saying too much, but you can see what she's thinking, you know, and you just see it, and you go, okay, well, the scenes are going to work. We could take out the script, we could throw away lines, we could do whatever. Like, they're just gonna be the way they need to be, and that's really what it is at the end of the day, right? And so it just, like, I feel like so many actors have that in them for the right part, you know, and I guess just hope for them that they get to play that they get to go in and get to show, and that people see it and they see, okay, this is the person who's going to always have the thing that we need, that we didn't even know we need. And it's fun to see that play out, like, you know, just all these scenes of conflict. Sometimes, you know, we don't have that much time or whatever. We're trying to find it. We're trying to find, like, how do we shoot these 5 or 6 people interacting without covering all of them, because there's not time. And so when someone like, you know, like Joaquin just kind of like a force just will like cut through the scene if he's supposed to be, you know, for instance, when he won't wear his clothes, everyone else is dressed in the cycling gear, comes out and he's not, and he laughs at everyone. He just goes. He's got all these things he's got to say. Not all of it's written, and it's just like he's going from here to here, and you can go with him or not. And so when you have that force, it just zeroes everything in on the scene, and it's like, it's about this guy, and it's literally about this guy walking from here and walking to there, you know, from the exit of the building to the bikes and the van. And as he does that, he's just going to mock everyone around him, and they're going to feel like they have to listen to him because he's so focused on his goal without seeming like it. And yeah, when you get that, you just go, okay, great, it's sort of covered, and he'll be there. He'll be a presence, even when he's not. Even when we can't focus on him, he's going to be that presence.
Sure. And it was fantastic too, because it seemed like the person that really had, you know, maybe didn't respect the adults around them for good reason, and was used to always being in charge of themselves.
Right.
And was, you said, go toe to toe with Greg. Had no fear, because that was a survival mechanism for him. You know? Totally.
I mean, and related to like the clothes or wearing the uniform, you know, to him, looking stupid in front of people is far more dangerous, perhaps, you know, and will have much worse repercussions than pissing off a teacher.
Sure.
You know, it's like, what are you going to do to me? Who cares? But my reputation and what people think of me, and not looking like a fool is like my currency, you know, which is not something we ever would have discussed, but it just comes through.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
What is one of your favorite scenes in Hard Miles?
I've got so many, but you know, one that I do want to call out, that I always like just as a scene, is, just because I think it's fun, is the first scene when Greg introduces them to writing and wearing the kits and all that kind of stuff, because it's the first time you kind of get to see all the boys together, and it's really mostly just a comedic scene, but it's a scene that Christian mostly wrote, and so I sort of have an outsider perspective of it, where I just think it's fun, and you get a lot of conflict and back and forth, and I love seeing that. But I also, when I'm watching the movie, I love more cinematic. It's less about writing, but I love the ride, their desert ride, which kind of gets a little bit surreal and changes up. And that was something where we just really were shooting in all these different locations. I mean, scenes from different states and stuff all kind of put together, and it was just a really fun thing to. It just was its own thing, its own animal when we were editing it and shooting it for when we wrote it, and that escalation is nice. And I also like the confrontation with the father, because I like feeling the shift in the movie and the shift of the pace happen. And I think that's something that's interesting to experience in movies, because movies are about time, and how we experience all this stuff across time. And really one of the few art forms, music and film, that are based on time, And so I just kind of like that experience.
And also, too, I felt it was strong, some of the flashbacks. And it wasn't a ton, but just it was very useful in defining who the character was.
Yeah, and that was a fun thing, too, was doing these really fragmented flashbacks. And for the boys, part of it was out of necessity, which is just we couldn't shoot that much with them. But thinking about what could bubble up and how could we shape that was a really fun challenge that kind of went back and forth between the edit and production, because it was all done in pickups. So it was this kind of thing of trying to find ways to show this before we'd even shot anything, and then try and design shooting the best version of that,
Going back to the scene that you said is your favorite, how did you direct that scene?
Honestly, probably part of the reason it's my favorite, or like a favorite of mine, is just because it was very loose on the day, and it was kind of letting the characters talk, finding the little bits and pieces of of improv and things like that could go in. But it was very much early in the process, very early in the process, and we were still figuring out how to manage this, many characters, and these sort of complicated things like getting on bikes and falling over and stunts and all that. So I think part of the reason it's one of my favorites is that I was so concerned it wasn't going to work, that we weren't going to have the time and the ability to kind of hone it in, but everyone just really brought it and delivered on the day.
Yeah, and maybe it was almost like unfolding in that they had never sort of been on this ride, and so it was sort of the parallels, I don't know. Maybe.
No, absolutely. That was something really lucky about the movie, was that the boys were learning to ride as we went, really, these kinds of bikes, and so they did get better as the movie went on, the production went on. If we would have had to shoot it all out of order, it would have really been hard.
And this was filmed whereabouts in California? I know parts were in Arizona, I think.
We shot the school stuff is Pomona, so maybe 30 miles east of LA or so. And then we were in Lone Pine, California, for about 3 hours north. Well, it's not really north. It just feels like it's north because it goes up in the mountains, so it gets cooler. And then Arizona, and we did pickups in Colorado too. Yeah.
Wow. And the elevation in Lone Pine?
I don't know exactly, but it gets up there. We shoot up the mountain, where maybe it's 5,000 feet, but I'm not 100% sure. But it gets up there, and yeah, it gets cold and the air gets thin,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And also some cliffs.
Mm-hmm.
It's very steep, beautiful terrain for the film, but yeah, I don't know. For those of us scared of mountain roads, there was a few scenes where, it was...
Definitely.
How do you direct a scene when all of your actors are riding bikes?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the process? How do you hear their dialogue?
Yeah, so I mean, we had a really great sound person, Richard, and he had everyone laved. It was in the helmets, because you couldn't lave them with the skin tight shirts. So very innovative, inventive technique that he did, because we didn't want to ADR everything afterwards. We would have lost a lot of the quality of their performance and voice and spontaneity. And so we had this thing called a grip tricks, which is like it's like a battery operated electric, what would you call it? No, it's not a go-kart. It's like an ATV, I guess. And we had a crane on it for the camera and everything. It was one of our biggest, expenses. Like, how are we going to do this? And so sometimes, the DP Mac and I would ride on it. Sometimes we were in a van, and they would just ride. They would ride, and we would shoot them. And it was a matter of, we'd plan out how we're going to do the moves, but we'd really be on there, just on the radio, like, accelerate, pan back to this character, and just really trying to frenetically let the actor play out their scene and capture it without shutting, kind of restarting them and, starting and restarting all the time. But then I would have a megaphone or like a radio if I was in the van, and would have to call out to, to get them to go back or say that line again. We didn't get it. It was just a whole lot of that over and over again. So it was complicated.
And how high were the temperatures? What was like the highest?
I know we hit 110 degrees in Arizona, something like that. So that was one where, we'd ride, I think, 20 minutes. We'd kind of do 20 minutes, then a cool down, 20 minutes, then a cool down. But yeah, we just had a big stretch of road. And so we would just keep running it, and then take the camera and change the lens and run it. Yeah.
Right, because it's, in addition to the actors, the camera getting hot too, and all the equipment.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure it could overheat out there. I don't know how they kept it from that happening, honestly.
Can you tell us about filming the one scene where they're descending down a mountain?
Yeah, and you mean specifically that one character who goes kind of by, right?
Right.
So what happened in that scene is we have a character, we have all this conflict that's occurred, and them climbing this hill and the struggle of that, and then due to an argument basically with Greg, the character Smink, played by Jackson Kelly, decides, I'm just going to descend this mountain on his own. And Greg hasn't shown them how to descend a steep mountain, anything like that. And so he starts to lose control of his bike, which it's really a speed wobble is what they call it, where the frame starts to shake. And then anything he tries to do to stop it will only make it worse. And so for that scene, really leading right up to the shoot, we didn't know how we were really going to do it, because we weren't doing anything on green screen, anything like that. We talked about trying to do that at different places, but it just wasn't the look of the movie. Everything we did for real, basically. And so we basically what we do is when we shoot on the grip tricks, sometimes we had a process trailer behind it, just a trailer that it would pull, and we could strap a bike to it. And so that would allow us to have at least one actor who could be pulled by the grip tricks and have us be in control of the descent. But even still then, we'd have to have the other, we had like stunt people riding alongside, all kinds of stuff like that. And it was really a matter of just very carefully planning out what you're going to see at every moment, so that the illusion wasn't broken, on what was being faked and what wasn't. But then at the end of the day, we still had the actors on a bike driving them down this mountain, so even then they enjoyed it, or I said they did, Matthew and Jackson, but they're still booking it, just sitting on a bike strapped to a thing, going fast down this thing. So it was a tense day for sure. Sure,
yeah, just the scene itself had me scared, but yeah, I didn't know, that you were using the sort of the flatbed.
Yeah.
The fourth wall wasn't broken, so that's good.
One other thing is, with our stunt riders, they, for them it was nothing. For them going 40 miles an hour down this road was just like very casual. but we had to actually slow them down because they would outrun the drone. It was just like the drone could go 40 miles an hour, and even the drone is flying over the mountains as they're weaving, and they were still outrunning it. So that gave us a lot of perspective just on how fast these things can go. But we got to, we got all that on camera, which is a great part of the scene.
How was it, just lastly, shooting in like Lone Pine? Were people curious, the townspeople?
It was great. I mean, shooting out in these remote places was great because, it has its own challenges because you're away from everything, like just time getting there, stuff like that. But then we had so much freedom there, like we were able to shut down roads and do all this kind of stuff and just have control over a space and work in it without being really, really packed in, which is what it was like in LA, where just the time it took simply to reset things because we had so little space to work was so different than being out in these vast areas and just riding for miles and shooting, and then riding for miles back the other way and shooting. It just gave us so much more freedom.
Was it always your plan to be an editor in addition to writing, directing?
So when I started out, I did everything as everyone kind of does when you're making short films. And when I went to USC, even though everyone really was still very early on in their careers, grad school, I just saw right away there were people who were so zeroed in on cinematography, so much more knowledgeable about it. And for me, I wasn't as interested, I guess, maybe in like the set life aspect, I was always sort of about the storytelling. And so I just gravitated more towards editing. They encourage everyone there to do something that's more practical, something that you could just do as a job and be hired, whether it's editing or cinematography or sound or something like that. And then also people pursue their, writing, directing, all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoy editing. I feel like that's where, it's certainly not the hardest part of the process per se. Like, I think being on set and getting through those days is really hard, but it is where you have to make the movie a movie, and it's no longer anything else. It's not footage, it's not a script. It's like now we're making it into a movie and we're putting music on it, whether it's the final music or not. We're figuring out how it all fits and works. And so I just really enjoy the process, and really great editor on this movie, Evan Schrodek, and he, I definitely value and encourage having an editor other than myself to give me perspective and kind of let me see the footage for what it is, instead of how I perceive it based on our time on set, that kind of thing, and just to have more ideas about things. And so, I did some editing on the movie, but very much it's like working as like a team and bouncing things off each other and thinking about how do we tell the story the best way now that we're here with this footage we have. And it's definitely a very rewarding part of the process for me.
Did you do the rough cut and then he came in, or it was different?
So it's more, and I did the same thing on my next movie too, and even my first movie a little bit, where generally, so he does the full rough cut, everything like that, and is basically, for most of the movie, it's a traditional working situation where he's editing and I'm giving notes, and sometimes, literally sometimes a note would be like, why don't we just take like 30 minutes and let's see if you can make the ending more emotional. Not even something I'm specifically saying about characters, like let's just you focus on that yourself and then I'll look at it, which is great. Because you don't have all the ideas or all the answers all the time. And then generally I'll pick something very specific parts of the movie that require zeroing in very specifically on footage because we shot it in a weird way, or like, for instance, that scene that I talked about that I like, which is him giving them the kits and building up, at least the first part of that scene, there's so much footage and back and forth and trying to find things and improvs that it'd be very hard, almost, for us to sit down and go through it together would be really time consuming and painful probably for both of us. So then certain scenes like that, I would just do like my pass on, because I kind of knew from set there's only really one path through this scene, you know, like we have so little time. You get something and you go, oh, actually that's interesting, that works. Then you move on, and then you are just putting it in your head, putting it together in your head, how it can all fit together. And from the outside, it's not going to be obvious how it should all fit together when you're shooting like that. So yeah, it's kind of a situation where there's probably, maybe it's like, 25% of the movie or something, I'm maybe doing an initial cut, like kind of doing a new cut, and then he's still taking that in the end and working on it. Yeah.
Just going back to something you said about film school, you said that the film school encouraged you to find something practical to do. Okay, so editing was something that you enjoyed. Were most people at the film school hoping to make their own projects, and then the practical part was what to pay the bills with in between?
Yeah, that's basically how most people are thinking of it. And by the end of school, some people are maybe already saying, I'm not that concerned about trying to write and direct anymore. I like doing this. I like editing or doing sound. Or some go specifically to do that. And then some maybe always will want to keep working on writing and directing over the years, and others will kind of drop out of it and just focus on what they want to work on in terms of their craft.
Do a lot of the people actually end up getting jobs in film? Or do some say, you know what, this was fun, I don't know if this is the life for me? It's definitely at times a gypsy life,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely that happens. I mean, some people decide, it's just not the best, I don't want to dedicate my whole life to this path. And a lot do just work in the industry, find a place and find a career, which is great.
Right, okay, then instead of trying to get booked on a next project and find work.
Yeah, and I mean, there are, some people might go to work at I think about editing, I guess, go to work at a post house or something, and they just could work there for, on a salary, and then others are freelance, but still, especially if they work on set and stuff, working most of the time. I know it is challenging now. Things are slowed down a lot now, but for the most part, it seemed like people I knew were working, at least that it stuck it out, and a lot of it's luck, a lot of luck in terms of you might have the same skills, but if you get hired to be a grip on a TV show, you make a lot more money than if you're kind of finding the odd grip jobs here and there, right. And it's really just about who you end up meeting, and hopefully that the people that can go the highest, you want to keep bringing you back.
How has your career as an editor made you a better writer and director?
I mean, definitely editing has given me a lot of perspective when writing and directing. I mean, I think they all kind of work together. The biggest thing in terms of editing for me is I'm looking for the same thing when I'm directing that I'm looking for when I'm just watching footage and editing. You're watching it and something happens and you go, okay, that's interesting, or that's the moment. That's the turn we needed or the feeling we needed. And then being on set, it's just happening live. And you're watching and going, okay, wait, we do have it. We got that moment. Or obviously there you can shape it and move it. It's not just what's the next take and hoping that it's something different, or something new that you might need. But that's a big part, is identifying it. And then having a sense of, especially a movie like Hard Miles that has a lot of improv and stuff like that, from editing, knowing, okay, I know how to get all of these inconsistencies to work, to feel cohesive, because each take's gonna be a little different and covered differently, and just finding that, just kind of knowing, okay, we do have it, even if it's a little different. And it's always hard and stressful because you're not doing everything from every angle, or you're not doing things over and over again. It's kind of like, I always think of it like you're trying to win the lottery, and like you want your number to drop. And when it drops and when you get one of those numbers, you go, okay, I've got that number, like on to the next one. And you just trying to get them all to drop down so you have the winning ticket or whatever. And it's just that learning, like knowing how to identify it and know we have enough and move on. Yeah.
Can you take us through your steps of the editing process for you personally? Where do you begin?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like when editing, you want to obviously you have to watch the footage and see what sparks, and that's really the first step. Is like, what are the moments that really feel alive in the footage and feel like there's something really happening there. There's some kind of great emotion or change or something. And then the starting point for me was kind of like trying to like protect that, because once you're editing and changing the pacing and all that kind of stuff, it's going to change the way that moment feels compared to all the other shots around it. So that's a big part of it, is like prioritizing what's most important. I think exploration again is good, and sometimes giving yourself the time to say, well, I'm just going to explore this other avenue for an hour, even if it doesn't lead anywhere, because maybe it will. But yeah, that's really the big thing. Is usually pretty pre-planned. Most of it's like pre-planned in terms of how are we going to shoot it and how are we going to get there, but not constricting yourself totally to that, and letting the footage kind of tell you what it should be. And just so much of editing is addition by subtraction, and just like getting the stuff that isn't working out of your way. You might think you need it to set something up, but if it's not working, if like a scene feels, there was a lot in Hard Miles, a lot of scenes got cut from early in the film, just too much stuff happening, too much setup, just weighing it down, and just finding that way to say, you know what, by the fifth or sixth time you've watched it and there's a scene early on that's always feels phony, probably because it's not, in this case, because it wasn't written as well as it could be, or we're just trying to get from A to B and this is how we did it. And at a certain point saying, okay, well, we're just not doing it no matter what. Like, I know we need these pieces somehow to come in, this story element, but it just can't be like this, and putting it aside and then finding a new solution. And I think that's the biggest thing, is just, if you have to do something, just try it. Just try it and see it. Don't debate it or think about it, just do it and see it for yourself.
You say having a great editor can help you, quote, let go of things and go toward the strength of the movie. I love that saying. Can you explain more?
Yeah, I mean, if you have an editor you really trust, they have this perspective, they have authorship on the movie, in the sense that they're creating like the pacing, you're working together and creating the pacing, creating the flow, the emotion, highlighting all the best moments in the movie. It's all an exploration. Like when you're on set and you're shooting, if a scene like doesn't quite work on the, in the writing, the actor's gonna struggle with it a little bit more. And there's always stuff that you think is an interesting idea, but it doesn't come off as truthful when it's actually, filmed and put up. And so I think really the editor's job is to kind of say, like, forget about the script a little bit, forget about the intentions, and work with what's here. This is the footage we have, and there's always things that you can always add little things to it, whether it's off-screen dialogue or voiceover or something like that, or like montage. But for the most part, this is what we're looking at, and recognizing where the strengths of the movie are. Because, in our case, we were really lucky where honestly every actor was fantastic and brought something very different and special to it. But sometimes you realize, okay, the B story, or like the C story should be the B story. Like, that's actually more compelling because I didn't realize that these actors were gonna kind of have this tension that they have, where they're actually driving a lot more of the conflict of the scene. And that's just the way that was there, but we didn't realize it as writing, like how prominent it would be. Something like that, and just keep finding like what's the best thing the movie could be, not just the best version of the script, because there's not always the same thing.
Sure, and so the sort of the saying of the movie tells you what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
We hear all the time, but it sounds like, you just...
Yeah, and let it, just not try and force it, and just be aware. And I think an editor, they have the distance of not being on set and not having to go through all the trials and tribulations it took maybe to get a certain shot or a certain moment, and to kind of identify, well, there's just not that much drama here, or there's just not that much conflict, to keep it driving forward, and to help make those hard choices, at least to show you this is what it's like without it. And generally, the way the movie becomes, the biggest changes I ever see in a movie, in the edit, is just getting the stuff that doesn't working out of the way, no matter what its intent was initially, is like the fastest way to elevate a movie. You could do it in like a day, just cut out everything that doesn't work and just watch it,
What are some things about making money as a filmmaker that no one tells you? You find out the hard way.
Yeah. I think the big thing making money as a filmmaker is really, it's really how long things take, and how much work goes into things maybe after you think you're done with the hardest part, Because for Hard Miles, I probably was working on the post for, 5 months after, probably in total, maybe not 100% full time, but and then you have, you have screenings, you have things like that. And even if, travel's paid for and stuff, you still have to manage your time, and if you're trying to get something else going while finishing up something, from a previous project, that can make it challenging. Like the premiere, our release of Hard Miles was coming in the weeks I was supposed to finish the final aspects of post for my next movie. And so it was just like really trying to juggle both of those things. And neither one of those things are things I'm being paid for, because that's done at that point. So I think that's really it, is just how long you have to go beyond, especially on an indie, the extent of time people are going to be paying you.
What advice do you have for filmmakers stuck between projects? Either can't get one off the ground, or kind of in between, just like you talked about earlier, where they're finishing up and starting something new?
Yeah. I think the best thing for people to remember is it is a marathon, not a race. And I think sometimes you have to stop and work on something else, either maybe creatively, like have like a cheat project if it's fun for you to do that, if it's fun to be writing on something that maybe you'll never make but is just fulfilling, like kind of try to keep going back to that. And then obviously it comes to work too. For me, it's like I'll edit. It was 5 years in between, I think, my first movie and Hard Miles, something like that. So it was a long time, did a lot of different editing and like some little writing stuff, but not anything that paid anything significant. It was just kind of a little novelty for me. And but it kept me in a place where I wasn't just trying to make a movie out of desperation for money, because if that's never going to work for you, I don't think, certainly not on the indie level, because you're not going to make enough money. But just creatively too, it keeps you at least feeling like you want to do something because you want to do it, because it's important to you.
Right. I would imagine a lot of people right now are in a strange situation, whether it's actors or producers, whatever. And, you'll see people talk about how they feel hopeless toward the industry. And so I think maybe that's just the one small part. Money not factoring into anything, which is a huge position to, everybody needs money for something. But,
right.
But just to feel creatively fulfilled and not have it weigh you down, that you feel angry about, like, I can't move forward in my life.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like people shouldn't be ashamed about working outside the industry or anything like that. I know some people really do, or they feel like they should only be working in their one field. But I think, I know people that have had movies that are #1 on Netflix, and they work odd jobs or do whatever. And what that really is doing is, that's sustaining them and making it so that they can be creative and have like a safe place to be creative, because they're getting their money from somewhere else. and that's like yeah, I mean, I think that's great. I think it's something to be proud of because you're putting, you're just focused on doing what you need to do to keep yourself in this business, in the town, if you need to live here in person, and working on what's important to you.
Right. Unfortunately, there's a huge stigma in LA, and I'm sure probably New York too. I don't know. I can't speak for it, but of having an odd job. Well, then you haven't really made it. Well, that's not true. I mean, people are in between things all the time. This is a very expensive city to live in, expensive to buy food, everything, gas. So it takes a lot to make things work, and I think if we can get beyond that part. But it can also be interesting to have a part-time job that is nothing like what you want to do. Because I find myself, if I have a job where I have to sit down all the time, then I don't want to do the work that's fun for me.
No, absolutely. Like like really early on, I realized, okay, I shouldn't be trying to direct commercials or trying to direct music videos or these other things, because I was realizing that it was too close where it was its own kind of grind, that was very hard, but also was taking away my ability and my joy for wanting to do my own projects, not because I didn't like even doing these projects, but because I was exhausting that part of my brain or energy on them when they weren't really, my project. And so I think having something completely separate from it could be great, actually.
Sure, and it's also another way to do research, even though you may not be there for that, but you're going to be coming across so many different people, I would imagine.
Sure.
That it could feed into some new project idea that you wouldn't get from just, I don't know.
No, absolutely. Good to know some real people, real people,
right.
quote unquote, that
Right,
aren't just in the business.
Yeah, like who's in that? Oh, okay, yeah, I don't want to see it or whatever, Right, real people that are like, oh, I remember them, I love them, and it is a different world, even just a few miles out of California. So, how many film festivals did you submit Hard Miles to?
I'm not totally sure. I mean, I'm trying to think of how many we played at and then how many we submitted. We probably got into maybe half that we submitted to, but we also were very kind of selective on what we submitted to and tried to submit places where we felt like it would be a good fit. So I don't know. I think if we played 10, we probably submitted to 20 or something like that. Yeah.
Was your plan to travel with the film?
I mean, well, honestly, when we set out to make this film, we didn't really think of it as like a festival movie. We really thought of it like, okay, well, it's kind of a sports movie, Even though I was always looking for trying to find the deeper thing there and make it very character-centric, we sort of had we're coming at it, looking at it through a slightly diminished lens. Not there's anything wrong with making a sports movie, but just like this is a movie more for a mass audience, even though it's an indie, than a festival audience. But then just as we kept working on it and it kind of went the way kind of went the direction it wanted to go, I did start to feel like, okay, it's maybe not like it's not meant for Cannes or something like that, but it does have a festival indie quality to it. And so we just started, what if we submit here, what if we submit there, and we actually had a really good festival run with it.
And sure, and it's more about the relationships. We can go back to Matthew Modine's earlier work with Vision Quest. You don't have to be a wrestling fan to love the movie.
Sure.
Yeah. Which I love the film. So yeah, it's about the strength of the relationships and
definitely
all that's happening. When you were submitting to film festivals, were you also submitting to film distributors?
Yes, we basically it was made as a total indie. We had no distributors or anyone interested in the movie when we made it. It was completely on its own, and I think sometimes it was through festivals or through connections that my producers had or people they'd met. We were able to get it to several different distributors and sales agents and production companies. And there were really some back and forth where there were people that we liked their perspective, one company's perspective from this end, another company's perspective from that end. And so in the end, it was, we were kind of debating what is the path for the movie. And something we really liked about Blue Fox was when we really felt they genuinely liked the movie, and they're a company that only really works on movies that they like and believe in. And that was a good thing to think about. And also that they believed in trying to do a theatrical release, and that there was a place for this movie in theaters. And at the end, we just thought, let's go for that. Like, let's embrace that and see what we can do on that level, because that's not an opportunity that comes along all the time. And so that was really our thinking, was like, even if it's a little riskier, or even if it's a little bit trickier to pull off, that's sort of the goal that everyone has and wants in the beginning, is like make a movie and get it in theaters.
Sure, and also too, to have it on the big screen and you see the vastness of the rides.
Totally.
And you can feel sort of the impact.
Yeah.
And then the smallness of like being this human that's not really sure what they're doing on this bike. And
totally.
Yeah, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we felt like, if people got a sense of it as a movie that belonged in theaters, then it would have its own, more of a life after too, and it could just go higher,
Will you ever contact distributors before you make a movie?
The movie I shot after this was completely completely different situation, where for Hard Miles, it was just independently raised funds, a completely independent movie. The producers, and me, in terms of creatively controlled, the producers controlled it. And with my movie that I'm just now really finished, Succubus, we were working with Shout Factory, and so they are a distribution company and sales company, and so they, a producer that I had met in the process of going through all this, before shooting Hard Miles even, they secured some money from them. So that was a situation where about a third of our budget maybe was coming in from a distributor, basically, that would then have the rights to distribute the movie in the way that they saw fit. And it was great to have that going in, because there's a certain safety net. You feel like at least somebody's already invested in this movie enough and was going to want to put it out there.
Do you think that's the same for an indie drama or like sort of an interpersonal narrative film, or horror is easier to secure funding?
I think anything that's genre is a lot easier. I think if it has like a thriller element or horror or something like that, it's easier to, it has more of a built-in audience, and it's less reliant on it just being good. There's a certain, like, if you can deliver on just those aspects of the movie, you are a lot safer. Whereas in a interpersonal drama, really what it is you should see it because it's really good. Like that's the reason people see it, And as much as anyone likes to think that it just will be really good, it's not. There's also just circumstances and limitations and things like that can make that hard. Yeah.
How many distributors were you speaking with before you made your final decision on going with Blue Fox?
I think it was really only 3, and probably in the end really 2, and Blue Fox was the most, I guess, they were, I think, the most serious about like finding something, like doing something that was like realistic, like they would make it happen. You know what I mean? Like they would make it happen versus like maybe trying to go too big or something like that, or having to like raise additional money. Like Blue Fox very much was about like knowing how to make it happen for our movie on this budget, and that was something that they had done before and specialized in, and so it was sort of like a thing of just kind of arriving at what we wanted to do too, what made sense for us, and should we just again go for the the theatrical, even knowing it would be like a low budget, P&A spend and all that kind of stuff. Like should we just go for it? Yeah.
Is Blue Fox handling the digital side of your distribution as well?
Yes, they are. So they'll handle all the video on demand and then sales to streamer, all that kind of stuff. And they're also managing, the sales of individual territories. So we're out in the UK now, like 100 screens, which is great. And they would have sold those rights or partnered with a UK company to do that. Yeah.
Are there certain countries that are very much into biking? You said the UK, so...
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of something we've been looking at and seeing, like, who's most interested in it based on that. And there's definitely a difference. Yeah. So hopefully Europe will be generally good.